I think that most people are under the impression that these are short-term kind of contractions and expansions, and that this is just the thing that needs to get worked through the system as we readjust to a post-COVID world, blah, blah, blah. I think it's different. If you just look at one thing and one thing only, which is that we have a massive labor shortage in America. And there is an incredible stat that I saw, which was the average hourly earnings of non-manager people in hospitality and travel. And the average salary, the mean salary, was around $20 some odd an hour, and it's now $33 an hour. We are going through a really sustained period where you cannot get people to do the work that needs to get done. Biden had to call the Port of LA and try to get these guys to be open 24 hours a day. The president of the United States is calling a local port, trying to get it to stay open. But why can't they stay open? Because you have longshoremen, you have all these unionized folks who will expect to get certain levels of compensation, which they deserve in order to do that work 24/7. But then all of that is going to get put through the system. And if you still have millions of jobs that needs to get done in order for the economy to function, the only efficient way that that's going to get resolved is by raising salaries. And those are consistent and persistent. Right? Those things are not just like, oh, you know what, I did say $50 an hour, but now I'm taking you back. Yeah, so that's one thing. And then second, so there's people, right? So labor capital, I just think it's getting more and more expensive to get folks to do work. And then there's the raw materials that you use to make anything. And everything that I see is that stuff is going bananas. And so I put these two things together and I'm like, I think this stuff is here to stay. I'm really kind of a little bit of a, and I had not worried. And you can see in every episode before this, I was always consistently like, there is no inflation. You can fade the inflation trade. And now I'm kind of positioning myself to hedge myself in this situation. I think that most people are under the impression that these are short-term kind of contractions and expansions, and that this is just the thing that needs to get worked through the system as we readjust to a post-COVID world, blah, blah, blah. I think it's different. And the reason I think it's different is if you just look at one thing and one thing only, which is that we have a massive labor shortage in America. And there's an incredible stat that I saw, which was the average hourly earnings of non-manager people in hospitality and travel. And the average salary, the mean salary, was around $20 some odd an hour, and it's now $33 an hour. We are going through a really sustained period where you cannot get people to do the work that needs to get done.
In my 20 years, this is the first time I've really seen that. So just to give you a sense of this, the markets are now acting to establish inflation expectations that the Fed just seems to not want to do anything about. And just to give you guys a sense of this, when in February, the markets really kind of had its first capitulation, what happened was that all of a sudden people digested all these facts that Stan just said and realized, wait a minute, all of this money is going to drive prices higher. And so what they did was they took the yield on the 10-year bond up by 100 basis points. And the markets freaked out. They went from 0.75 to 1.75. The Fed came out and said, hey, hold on, nothing to see here. Everything's going to be fine. But then everything since then has been sort of leading to this realization. Commodity prices are up 50%. There's this kind of joke that you see a bed of lumber moving across a railroad. It's like $1 billion of lumber just because of how expensive it is. There are shortages everywhere. You'll be shocked to know that today, Chipotle put out the following guidance, which is they said they are increasing the minimum wage to $15 and that within 3 years, you can make $100,000 a year at Chipotle. That is as much as some engineers and coders in the United States. Dara Khosrowshahi, the CEO of Uber, said on the Uber earnings call last week that the average hourly rate that some drivers in New York, Uber drivers in New York, were getting paid was $38 an hour.
What?
$38 an hour. So what does all of this mean? I think what Stan is trying to say,
$100,000 a year.
but we're in this weird place where we've decoupled the government institution that's responsible for fiscal stability, and then the overall capital markets used to work in tandem, and they're no longer working in tandem because you have a narrative and a set of data points that aren't supported by the facts. And so this is an interesting thing. In the CDC versus the American people example, there's no way to push back, right? I mean, governors can act independently, cities will act independently, but at the end of the day, the teachers' unions are working with the CDC, the school camps have this guidance, and you're stuck in this morass. In the capital markets, that's not necessarily true. And so you can change and you can re-rate asset prices based on sentiment. And I think what everybody is saying in this example is, we're past the emergency. We've put too much money in the economy. We need to reopen. And we now need to face the fact that there are massively rising prices, which means that there will be inflation. And if you don't act, the capital markets will continue to act for us. And so this is an example today where you're just seeing a bloodbath in the market.
I actually think that's exactly what it is. There was this really interesting tweet that I saw on Twitter. Hopefully, Nick, you can find it. But it was some kid that basically said, I'm growing up in Atlanta and there's a bunch of kids that I used to run with, who would otherwise be in the streets, right? Causing all kinds of trouble. And these kids are now at home, like specking NFTs and posting on TikTok or whatever. It's just a completely different reimagination of labor and time spent. And that's just a very small example. And so that maybe touches retail or maybe touches quick service restaurants. But there's all these different things where now that at the end of this pandemic, people are making very different decisions about their time and how to spend their money. And again, I'll tell you again, there's a lot of people. You got to remember how many people in the United States have died or are dealing now with some reasonably important health issues at the back end of coronavirus. 500,000 people, 1 million people. I want you to keep in mind what I told you guys before. There is $70 trillion that has to get transferred down from all these baby boomers down to these people in their 20s, 30s, and 40s. And don't think for a second that they're not making different optimization decisions around perceived wealth. So I just think inflation is here. I think the labor shortage is going to get worse, not better. I think we're going to have to pay people more to get out of it. I think prices are going up. Input costs are going up. Energy costs are going up. This is it. And I think that probably the Fed and the ECB are really raising. This time next year, they're probably in a really, really tighter posture. The only efficient way that that's going to get resolved is by raising salaries.
In February, the markets really kind of had its first capitulation.
I think prices are going up. Input costs are going up. Energy costs are going up. This is it.